Hello, hello, chapter 13, part 2, Fishy, 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 Fish, that were ent wherever I did go. It's a Monty Python reference, so if you don't get it, oh well. Talking about fish, right? So, I'm going to start talking about fishing. That's one of the issues here. This shows you from 1850 to today how much fish has been caught, and they measure it by how many tons. So, every year, how many tons of fish. And you notice that a slow and steady rise with some drops. But right here, 1960, all of a sudden, zoom. We go from basically 300,000 tons to almost 800,000 tons. And it really peaks and then all of a sudden begins to drop. And actually now you can't see under here, but it's lower now than it was in the 1850s. So what's happening? Why are we all of a sudden fishing less? Because people still like fish, right? Well, a lot of this is overfishing, which is what we're going to talk about in this section. Okay? So this map here shows you, it's kind of hard to see, the areas in red are areas that were overfished in 1950. What that means is there was so much fish caught here that the next year there was not much fish to catch. Remember way back when we did the Tragedy of the Commons game where I had you pick up the fish with the straw, the goldfish crackers, right? And the first time you played it, you all went for the fish right away. And then I said, well, there's no more fish for you to have for the next round because you ate them all. That's kind of what happened here. Very small area, but it had happened. But what happens is in the 1950s, we developed industrial style fishing. So instead of a small guy or two guys on a boat, we have a boat that has a crew of 50. It goes out for 2 to 3 years at a time. It catches all these fish in nets that are 15, 20 miles long. Huge, huge nets. And it has a big, big hold full of ice to freeze them, right? And so what happens is we start fishing more and more. And by the 1980s, the amount of fish that was caught in the wild begins to decline, actually. We fish more but catch less fish. And this is something that we see around the world. So look at this map in 2005, and you can see that just from this little area in Europe to now large sections of the Pacific Ocean and Asia. And in fact, in that time, we've also seen quite a few species go extinct. But the interesting thing is, we actually eat more seafood, and the main reason is we've been fish farming. So instead of catching fish in the wild, we have maybe a fish pen near the coast or big, huge ponds that we dig to grow catfish. And that's actually replaced it. But you can see right here the breaking point. When you look at a fishery, so look at Lake Michigan. The fishermen would go out every morning to Lake Michigan. They would sail out in their little boats and catch fish. And if every year you catch fish and there's more to catch the next year, you're underexploited. But what if you catch, say, 50 tons of fish a year in Lake Michigan, and you can't catch any more? That's the most you can catch. That means you're taking out as much as can be naturally replaced. You're fully exploited. Now, what happens if you take out 50 tons, but the next year there's 45 or 48? So now you're overexploited. You're starting to take out more fish than can be naturally. And if you keep on going, you get to crash. And crash is where you take out 50 tons, and next year there's two or none. You've actually taken out more fish than we can reproduce, and maybe something else happens where there's a disease and the fish just die. So in the 1950s, there were no crashed fisheries, but by 2003, 32% of the fisheries in the world had collapsed. 1/3 of all fishing areas had collapsed in the space of roughly 50 years. And the vast majority now are, if not crashed, are exploited. So this is why we have to turn to fish farming in a lot of ways. Another example is renaming. So if you go to a really nice restaurant, you're probably going to get on the menu Chilean sea bass, which sounds, ooh, so lovely, sea bass. Up until 1977, it was called Patagonian toothfish. It doesn't sound as yummy, does it? A salesman, fish wholesaler, he actually filed a name, and the U.S. government accepted it. Let's call it sea bass, because it sounds like bass, which is a really, really tasty game fish. So this is the fish that before 1977 was not very commercially attractive. People didn't want to catch it because nobody was going to buy it. But now there's nothing else left. So why don't we have laws about this? Fishing seasons. Well, we kind of do. This map shows you the situation off the coast of Boston. all these different colored lines are different agencies that govern types of fishing. And so it can be quite confusing. In Chicago, if you're going to Lake Michigan, the city of Chicago has fishing laws. Cook County has fishing laws. The state of Illinois has fishing laws. The United States government has fishing laws. And because we share the Great Lakes with Canada, we have international treaties about fishing laws. And all these laws sometimes work together, sometimes work apart. But that means there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different agencies watching this. It gets confusing. And so a lot of times, basically things can fall between the cracks. The other thing is this. Remember we talked about international waters? If you're out here in the middle of the ocean, what country can tell you to stop fishing? And the answer is none, right? This is international waters. And that's where a lot of the fishing has really taken a hit. Now, there are treaties that a lot of the countries in the world sign saying that they pledge to maintain these fisheries or not take so much. But the thing is this, they can all sign it. But who enforces it? What happens if a boat's out here? Are we really going to send off a destroyer or an aircraft carrier? That's the question. A lot of these treaties aren't really enforced very well. Now, why are we eating so much fish? Well, besides the fact that it's really yummy. Well, a lot of it's population pressure. This map shows you the amount of protein in a diet that is given by fish. The darker the green, the more the protein. So here in Greenland and in Zaire and in Cambodia, more than 30% of the protein in people's diets comes from fish. So fishing is very important. And these countries that are the darkest green are also some of the fastest growing populations in the world. So as their populations increase, fish is a traditional part of their diet, right? So developing nations, these nations traditionally have had a much higher rate of growth than these countries. So that's leading a lot of the demand. Secondly, the way we fish. This is a factory trawler. This ship is about 200 feet long. It can go out fishing for about 2 to 3 years. These nets, big, huge nets they drag, literally strip mine the ocean. And all the fish they catch, they either can keep it here frozen, or they have another boat come out in the middle of the ocean, take the fish, freeze it, and take it away. And they can basically do in one day what a small individual boat could do in a year. So we're fishing at a much higher rate. And the technology is better, right? Here you have a fish market in India. These fish were caught probably that morning. If you don't eat them pretty quick, they're going to rot. But now with technology, the fish that we catch, right, we can preserve it. And so now, most of the world, when you get fish, it isn't a whole fish. It's fish fillets. It's fish sticks, right? It's frozen. It's shipped. So fish last longer, so there's less incentive to fish less. Another thing is bycatch. And I'm going to warn you, this is not a pretty picture. But when you dip a net into the ocean and you pull it up, you don't get to pick and choose what gets in the net. This dolphin did not choose to be picked up with these fish. It was probably eating the fish itself. But that dolphin is dead. The sea turtle is tangled up in nets. And so when you do these big, huge fishing trawlers that basically drag these nets to the ocean, they catch more than their intended target. Anything that is not what they wanted but caught anyway is called bycatch. And the problem is, it's dead too. So they're taking everything out. They usually just toss the stuff back over. We talked about this last week, the coastal pollution, the dead zone. Human activities have modified coastal habitats where fish live or lay their eggs, and so there's less place for them to live. And then another one, last one, is this idea of trawling or dredging. One of the ways we actually fish trawling, we take a big net and we basically just drag along the bottom of the ocean. We pick up everything, fish, plants, coral, all that stuff. In fact, up to half of the stuff they catch is bycatch. So not very effective. But what happens is you're basically stripping the bottom of the ocean and you disrupt this huge amount of sediment. I mean, imagine if people flew an airplane over a forest and just dragged nets, right? The devastation would be immense. And so this totally destroys habitats. Last one, government policies. Governments don't always act in a way that is beneficial to the fish. So a good example are subsidies. In the United States, fishing is a big industry. As of 2004, it employs almost 100,000 people. There are almost 20,000 boats doing it. And you can't see it right here, but the amount of money this produces is $31 billion a year. And so a lot of local governments subsidize fishing. It's income, it's taxable income, and so they are not always going to act in a way that is detrimental to the fishing industry. And also the failure to regulate. We talked about the tragedy of the commons. A lot of these bodies of water are commonly owned. Really remember who owns the oceans. It's hard to regulate these things when there's more than one body regulating it. So then what do we do? How do we fix this? Well, one of the solutions are marine protected areas. These are basically like the equivalent of a forest preserve or a natural park, but they preserve areas of water and the seabed under them. This is the Pacific National or the Hawaiian Islands Ecosystem Restored Area. This area is west of the Hawaiian Islands. It's small islands and coral reefs, but all this area within this line is protected, so no fishing, no trawling, no dredging is allowed. And these are where fish can basically have a preserve. And there are many more of these. There's a huge one right off the coast of Belize on their coral reef. And so these give protected areas, much like nature preserves do for land animals. Another thing, as we talked about last week, is how shorelines are being changed by humans, is regulate the development. So instead of having a shoreline like this on the Chicago River, where you see all the pollution and the junk, what about if we restored it to be more natural and have more grass and a more natural bank and basically rebuild and regulate it? This is Horner Park on the north side. This is the north branch of the Chicago River right here. So this is actually creating a relatively new and safer habitat for fish and small land animals in the water. Another thing we can do is reduce bycatch, right? So great news, I've been let go. In other words, if we can stop the bycatch from being so disruptive, maybe there's a way to let the animals out. A lot of nets have these small little gaps that turtles can swim out of. The fish somehow don't figure it out, but there's many ways. Some nets have floats that allow dolphins to swim over the top before the boat picks it up. So if we can reduce bycatch, that would definitely help. Another last thing is this idea that you think locally but act globally. So maybe you can't stop the fishing in the ocean, but you can choose what you buy. So this here is an app I found, the Seafood Watch app. It's actually through the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California. But it tells you, if you're going to go buy fish, which fishing companies are the most responsible. They do the most to reduce bycatch. They observe international treaty or law. This one right here is a link to the Shed Aquarium. And let me show you that. I'm going to pause this and reopen it. So I click on that link, and this is what opens up. This tells you right here, these are restaurants that make a commitment to using sustainable seafood or healthy water. So these right here, restaurants, retailers, places that sell seafood that support sustainable seafood. So places that, don't strip mine the ocean, right? And you can scroll down and you can see right here, if I click on that, right, these are different restaurants. So you can make that choice. So what this does is just tells you, that it gives you the knowledge to make a better choice. And if the idea being that if you, with your dollar support restaurants or stores that make healthier choices, that will lead fishers to adapt those policies as well. And that's all we have for this lecture. So remember, you can go back and watch these again, especially when you're taking your Kahoot challenge. They go right in the order of the video, so feel free to watch them hand in hand. And you guys all have a good afternoon, and I will see you virtually this week.